The knock didn't come from the front door. It came from the gate. 3 loud metallic bangs echoed across my property, sharp enough to make my dog jump and my heart spike. It was almost 10 p.m., the kind of hour when nothing good ever shows up unannounced. I stepped onto my porch and saw flashing red and blue lights cutting through the darkness at the end of my long gravel driveway. Police. On my land. At night. I grabbed my phone and hit record. 2 squad cars sat just beyond my gate, engines idling, headlights aimed straight at my house like I was already a suspect. A third vehicle was parked behind them, an SUV with a familiar logo on the side. The HOA. My jaw tightened. I walked down the driveway slowly, staying well inside my fence line. As I got closer, 2 officers stepped out of their cruisers, hands resting near their belt. "Sir," one of them called, "we received a report of illegal activity on this property." "From who?" I asked. Before either of them could answer, the HOA rep stepped forward. "You're in violation of multiple HOA codes," he said smugly. "We believe you're operating an unauthorized structure and conducting prohibited use of the land." "At 10 at night?" I replied. The officer shifted uncomfortably. "We were told there was a potential safety issue." "There is," I said, pointing at the HOA SUV. "That." The HOA guy scoffed. "We had no choice. You've ignored our notices for months." "I don't belong to your HOA," I said flatly. "This land is outside your jurisdiction." "That's not what our maps show." "Your maps are wrong." The officers looked at each other. "Sir," one of them said carefully, "do you have documentation proving ownership?" I smiled. "Give me a second." I went back to the house and came back with a folder I'd learned to keep ready: deed, survey, county zoning, everything. I handed it over through the gate. The HOA rep tried to interrupt. "You don't need to look at that." "Yes, we do," the officer said. They read quietly under the flashing lights. The longer they looked, the more the tone changed. Finally, one of them looked up. "This property is not part of Sunrise Valley HOA." The HOA rep's face went pale. "That can't be right." "It is," the officer replied. "Your organization has no authority here." "But we issued fines. We sent enforcement." "Illegally," I said. The second officer turned to the HOA rep. "You called us under false pretenses." He stammered. "We were just trying to enforce community standards." "This isn't your community," the officer snapped. And that's when I realized something. They didn't send cops to enforce rules. They sent cops to intimidate me. And they just walked straight into a legal nightmare. Because now it wasn't just an HOA dispute. It was abuse of law enforcement. And I was done letting them get away with it. The officers didn't leave. That was the first thing I noticed after they finished reading my paperwork. They didn't hand it back and drive off. They didn't apologize and tell the HOA rep to take it up with a lawyer. They stood there, still, serious, staring at the HOA SUV like they were trying to decide who had just lied to them. "You told dispatch this property was part of Sunrise Valley HOA," the taller officer said slowly. The HOA rep swallowed. "It is." The officer held up my deed. "No, it isn't. It's county-zoned agricultural land. No HOA jurisdiction. No annexation. No enforcement authority." The flashing red and blue lights washed over the man's face, turning him pale, then red, then pale again. "So explain to me," the officer continued, "why you sent us here claiming illegal activity." The HOA rep opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "He's been ignoring HOA fines. We had to escalate." "You don't get to fine someone you don't control," I said. "That's extortion." The second officer turned to him. "You reported a safety threat." "There is one," the HOA rep said quickly. "Unauthorized structures. Improper land use. Potential fire hazards." "Did you personally verify any of that?" the officer asked. "No, but..." "So you called the police at 10 p.m. based on nothing?" The HOA rep's voice rose. "We were enforcing community standards." This is not your community, the officer snapped. I could feel the tone shift. What had started as a routine call had turned into something much uglier and much more serious. Sir, the first officer said to me, have you ever been told by this HOA to stop using your land? Repeatedly, I replied. They've sent letters, fines, threats. I've told them every time that they have no authority here. And they kept doing it anyway? Yes. The officers exchanged a look. That's harassment, the second officer said. And using police to do it? Abuse of emergency services, the first added. The HOA rep tried to backpedal. We were just trying to resolve a dispute. At night, the officer asked. With armed officers? You didn't have to come with lights. You called 911, the officer cut him off. You don't get to choose how we respond. I pulled out my phone and showed them the months of emails, threats, fake violation notices, warnings about enforcement action. This isn't a misunderstanding, I said. It's a campaign. The officers scrolled silently. This is civil, the HOA rep said weakly. You shouldn't be involved. You made it criminal when you lied to get us here, the officer replied. He turned to me. Do you want to file a complaint? I didn't hesitate. Yes. The HOA rep's face drained of color. The officers separated us. One took my statement. The other stood with the HOA rep, who was now suddenly very quiet. He claimed you were operating illegally, the officer told me. Do you have permits for what you're doing? I smiled. Every one of them. I went back to the house and brought out another folder. Zoning approval, building permits, inspections. Everything the county had issued. The officer nodded slowly as he flipped through it. This is clean, he said. The second officer walked back over, expression dark. He admitted the HOA knew they had no authority here. I looked at the HOA rep. You said what? I didn't mean. You lied to the police, the officer said. That's a crime. The HOA rep started sweating. We were just trying to enforce. Enough, the officer snapped. You're lucky we're not arresting you right now. What? He blurted. You knowingly made a false report to dispatch, the officer said. And you did it to intimidate a private citizen. The flashing lights seemed suddenly a lot brighter. You are not to contact this property owner again, the officer continued. No letters. No visits. No fines. Nothing. The HOA rep looked at me like this was somehow my fault. If you do, the officer said, we'll treat it as harassment. The second officer handed me a card. Here's the case number. We're forwarding this to internal review. For what? I asked. For misuse of law enforcement. The HOA rep's mouth fell open. This isn't over, he hissed at me as the officers walked him back toward his SUV. I smiled. Oh, it's just starting. The HOA rep didn't even look at me as he climbed into his SUV. He just slammed the door, started the engine, and sat there for a moment like he was trying to decide whether anger or fear should win. In the end, fear did. The SUV rolled backward, turned, and disappeared down the gravel road, leaving nothing behind but dust and the echo of his bad decisions. The police stayed. That part surprised me. Usually, once the problem is gone, so are the flashing lights. But these two didn't move. They stood at my gate, talking quietly into their radios, eyes still on my property like this wasn't over yet. Sir, the taller officer finally said, walking back over, we're escalating this. Escalating how? I asked. You've been targeted, he said. This wasn't a one-off. This HOA has been using law enforcement to pressure you. That's a serious issue. The second officer nodded. We're forwarding this to the county attorney. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Good. They took more statements, times, date, copies of the HOA letters, screenshots of emails, everything I had. I sent it all straight to their secure portal right from my phone while they watched. You've been documenting this for a while, one of them said. Because they never stop, I replied. He nodded. That was smart. Before they left, they gave me something even better than a case number. They gave me a warning. Expect retaliation, the officer said. Groups that misuse authority don't usually quit when they're caught. They get sloppy. That night, I barely slept. And sure enough, 2 days later, the first letter arrived. Not from the HOA. From their lawyers. It accused me of harassment, interference, obstruction of HOA enforcement. I laughed when I read it. They were trying to scare me into backing down. So I did the opposite. My attorney filed a lawsuit. Not just against the HOA, but against the board members personally. False reporting to police. Civil harassment. Abuse of process. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. And we attached the police report. The HOA had no idea how badly they'd messed up. Because when you drag law enforcement into a lie, you don't just create a civil case. You create a paper trail. The county attorney reached out a week later. Your HOA made a false 911 report, she said. We're investigating. The board started panicking. Emergency meetings. Mass emails. Backtracking. One board member resigned. Another blamed the HOA rep. The HOA rep blamed the management company. The management company blamed the board. It was beautiful. And the best part? They couldn't make it stop. The police had their records. The county had their call logs. The court had their lawsuit. For the first time since they decided I was a target, the HOA wasn't in control of the story anymore. I was. A month later, we were in mediation. The HOA's lawyers looked exhausted. The board members looked terrified. And the HOA rep, the same one who had smirked behind those police cars, wouldn't even look at me. You abused law enforcement to intimidate a private landowner, my attorney said calmly. That's not just illegal. It's reckless. They offered to settle. I said no. I wanted it on record. 2 weeks later, the county announced charges against the HOA rep for filing a false police report. The lawsuit went public the same day. And suddenly, every homeowner in that HOA realized their dues had been used to try to turn cops into a private enforcement squad. The fallout was instant. Board members resigned. Homeowners demanded audit. The management company cut ties. By the time the dust settled, Sunrise Valley HOA wasn't enforcing anything anymore. They were just trying to survive. All because they thought they could scare one landowner at 10 p.m. They were wrong. And now everyone knew it. The HOA went quiet after the charges were announced. No emails. No notices taped to my gate. No fake violations showing up in my mailbox. That's how I knew they were scared. When bullies stop talking, it's not because they're sorry. It's because their lawyers told them to shut up. 2 weeks after the raid, a thick envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside was a settlement offer. They wanted me to sign away my right to sue in exchange for mutual non-interference. No money. No apology. No admission of wrongdoing. Just a piece of paper asking me to pretend none of it ever happened. I handed it straight to my attorney. She laughed. They're panicking, she said. They know what discovery is going to show. And she was right. Because when we subpoenaed their internal communications, we found the truth. The HOA board had voted to send enforcement to my property even after being told it was outside their jurisdiction. They'd discussed using police to pressure me. They'd complained that I was uncooperative and needed to be reminded who controls the area. They had built a paper trail of arrogance. Every email, every message, every recorded meeting, all of it became evidence. The county attorney added another charge against the HOA rep, conspiracy to misuse emergency services. That was the moment the board turned on him. They tried to claim he acted alone. But the emails proved otherwise. One board member had literally written, "If he won't comply, let the cops scare him." That sentence alone was worth more than any settlement check. The news got hold of it. Local stations started running stories about a homeowner targeted by an HOA that had weaponized the police. Interviews. Headlines. Angry homeowners calling in. The HOA's reputation collapsed in real time. At the next board meeting, it was standing room only. Homeowners weren't there to discuss landscaping. They were there for blood. Did you really send cops to someone's house at night? Are you using our dues to harass people? Who authorized this? The board members sat there, sweating under fluorescent lights, realizing they could no longer hide behind closed-door meetings. 3 of them resigned that night. The management company quit the next morning. Their insurance carrier dropped them by the end of the week. And my lawsuit kept moving forward. Depositions were scheduled. Witnesses were lined up. The HOA rep's criminal case went to court. The judge didn't like what he saw. You don't get to lie to police to enforce private rules, he said. That's not governance. That's intimidation. The HOA rep took a plea deal. A fine. Probation. A permanent record. But more importantly, an admission of guilt. That admission went straight into my civil case. By the time mediation rolled around, the HOA didn't look powerful anymore. They looked broke. Their lawyers quietly suggested a full settlement. This time it came with money, and public admissions, and legally binding protections. I signed it, not because I wanted to end the fight, but because I'd already won it. The HOA was forced to admit they had no jurisdiction over my land, publicly retract all violations, pay damages and legal fees, or remove the board members involved, or submit to state oversight, and most importantly, permanently ban any HOA contact with my property. When it was done, I went back to my land and stood in the quiet. No flashing lights, no fake authority, no threats, just my fence, my house, my land. The HOA had tried to use the system against me. Instead, the system had used them, and they would never forget the night they learned the difference between power and law. The settlement became official on a quiet Tuesday morning. No press conference, no dramatic statements, just a signed order from the court that made everything very clear. The HOA was done with me. They could never find me, contact me, or send anyone onto my land again. Not a letter. Not a notice. Not a knock at the gate. When I got the email from my attorney, I was standing out in the field behind my house, watching the sun rise over my property. For the first time in months, the light felt peaceful instead of threatening. That night at 10 p.m. had almost turned my world upside down. But now, it had become the thing that saved me. The HOA rep's criminal case wrapped up a few days later. He pled guilty to filing a false police report and conspiracy to misuse emergency services. The judge didn't go easy on him. You don't get to use police as your personal enforcement squad, she said. That's a violation of public trust. He walked out of that courtroom with a criminal record and no job. And the HOA? They walked out with something worse. A reputation. Homeowners started pulling their dues. Vendors stopped taking their calls. Their insurance was canceled. Within 6 months, Sunrise Valley HOA was dissolved by the state. No board. No management company. No authority. Just a stack of lawsuits and a very long lesson in what happens when people confuse control with law. I went back to my land that evening and locked my gate, not because I was afraid anymore, but because I didn't have to leave it open for anyone. The place was quiet again. No sirens. No flashing lights. No strangers demanding things they had no right to. Just the wind, the trees, and the land I had worked to protect. I put up a new sign on the gate. Private property, no trespassing. Simple. Legal. Final. A few weeks later, I got a call from a neighbor who had been part of the HOA. "You're the reason we finally got free," he said. "They've been bullying people for years. Nobody ever fought back." "Well," I replied, "now you know what happens when someone does." He laughed. "They should have left you alone. They really should have. That 10 p.m. raid had been meant to scare me. Instead, it gave me everything I needed. Police reports, case numbers, a recorded timeline of abuse. The HOA had handed me the rope, and then stepped right into it. I never fired a shot. Never raised my voice. Never broke the law. I just used it. And that's what made it so powerful. The land I own is quiet now. Peaceful. Undisputed. But every time I drive past that old HOA office, now sitting empty with a "for lease" sign out front, I remember how close they came to ruining themselves. Not because they made a mistake, but because they made it official. They called the cop. And when you do that, you'd better be right. They weren't. And that night, at exactly 10 p.m., they learned something they'll never forget. You can't bully someone with the law when the law is on their side.